Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. As many people know, life can be a constant struggle. Sometimes making ends meet isn't as simple as getting a job. Several years ago, I found myself in a difficult situation. I couldn't find work. It was one rejection after another, and at that time, hardly anyone was hiring. The few companies that were looking for staff were extremely competitive. I was barely making a little more than minimum wage working in the deli section of a supermarket. I remember one night while browsing the internet looking for ways to earn extra income, I ended up exploring Craigslist. I had heard about the site before, but I had never taken the time to check it out myself. I came across an ad for a freelance job as what they call a mystery shopper, or undercover customer. For those unfamiliar with the term, it basically means someone who visits a store as if they were a regular customer, but with the intention of evaluating the employees. The worker is rated based on certain criteria. If they make eye contact, greet the customer, recommend a product, offer to assist them in finding something, say something polite at the end, etc. It sounds simple, but many companies, including the one I worked for, take it very seriously. A poor score can lead to a reprimand or even getting fired if the employee accumulates more than one negative report. Since I already had retail experience and knew exactly what was expected of staff, I thought this was a great opportunity to make some extra money. The first store I visited was part of a local supermarket chain in my hometown. Interestingly, it was the same company I worked for, though it wasn't the same location. I began walking through the store and noticed a young man, probably in his 20s, stocking products on the shelves. He glanced at me briefly, but immediately looked back down. He didn't greet me, which cost him points from the start. I was the one who had to greet him and ask which aisle the canned tuna was in. Without looking up and in a dry tone, he said, "Aisle 2, halfway down." He clearly lost more points for not making eye contact or offering to walk me there. Just so you know, I realize how absurd all of this sounds, but these companies really take it seriously. They don't care if the employee was helping someone else or if there was a valid reason. One bad report can ruin someone's job. I paused, giving him the chance to redeem himself with a "have a nice day," but he never said it. In the end, I had to say goodbye first. Only then did he look up and respond with, "Yeah, you too." That's when I saw his name tag, Patrick. I smiled and walked away. I noticed Patrick kept staring at me. I could feel his eyes on me as I walked down the aisle, and I began to suspect he might have realized I was a mystery shopper. I planned to ask other employees some questions, but I started feeling uncomfortable. Every time I looked up, I could see Patrick at the end of the aisle. It felt like he was following me. I had no idea what his intentions were, but I didn't want to find out. I headed to the checkout, where the cashier, by the way, passed her evaluation without any issues. After paying, I rushed out to my car. I just wanted to get out of there and finish the assignment. Once inside my vehicle, I started writing the report while everything was still fresh in my memory. But while I was typing, I looked up and saw Patrick walking briskly through the parking lot. I ducked slightly in my seat, hoping he hadn't seen me. Fortunately, it looked like he hadn't noticed. He kept walking until he reached his car, a dark four-door sedan, and quickly drove off. I waited a few minutes before leaving. I don't know why, but that guy made me feel incredibly uneasy. I couldn't stop thinking, why was he following me around the store? If he really was. But it felt very real. Maybe I was overreacting, as I tend to, but something about him wasn't right. That night I got home, emailed the report to my supervisor, and went on with my life. Within a day or two, I had completely forgotten about the incident. A couple of nights after submitting the report, I was having a late dinner with my boyfriend. We were just relaxing, enjoying the evening. But that peaceful night was suddenly interrupted by a loud, aggressive banging at the front door. It wasn't just a knock. It was like someone was throwing their full weight against the door. You have no idea how terrifying it is to hear something like that late at night. We looked out the window and I was speechless. It was Patrick, the same guy from the supermarket. He looked awful, with sunken eyes like he hadn't slept in days. I yelled at him to leave, told him I was calling the police, but he didn't budge. He kept slamming the door and demanding that we let him in. He kept repeating that I had ruined his life and that I had to pay. He said things like, "This isn't over." I didn't even want to imagine what he meant by that. While all of this was happening, my boyfriend had already called the police. Thankfully, they must have been nearby because the first patrol car arrived in under 2 minutes. And thank God, because I don't know how much longer that door would have held. Patrick was really slamming into it hard. An officer tackled him right at the entrance and handcuffed him. During the arrest, they found a knife hidden in his waistband. That was the most terrifying detail of the entire story. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if he had gotten inside. What was he planning to do with that knife? After his arrest, I finally got some clarity. Apparently, it was all a horrible coincidence. Patrick was at a breaking point, and my visit to the store was the final straw. He was drowning in debt, and, as I later learned, his girlfriend had left him the same day I did the evaluation. When I approached him in the store, he had just a few minutes left in his shift and was completely mentally shattered. I get it. We've all been close to that breaking point, in one way or another. That day I just caught him at the worst possible time. And to make things worse, he had already failed a mystery shopper report before mine. Mine was the second, and he lost his job because of it. What still confuses me is how he found out where I lived. I don't think he followed me home that day from the store, but I can't think of any other way he could have known. After that, I started staying at my boyfriend's place and almost never went back to my old house alone. I don't know what happened to him afterward, but I truly hope he found some direction. And more than anything, I hope these companies eliminate the mystery shopper program, because it's just inhumane. Story 2. Not long ago, I decided to take the advice of a friend who suggested I look for nanny jobs on Craigslist. I know it might sound strange, but I was surprised by how many ads there were for that kind of work. Normally, I wouldn't have needed a job, but at that moment I had just ended a relationship with my boyfriend and wasn't sure if I could cover rent. This seemed like a simple way to earn some money. Besides, I had worked as a nanny when I was a teenager, and my brother has 2 young children, so I felt fairly confident in the subject. After all, how hard could it be to watch a couple of kids for a few hours? I secured a job for Saturday afternoon and began exchanging messages with a woman named Chloe. She explained that she and her husband would be leaving the house around 5:15 p.m. and returning sometime after 10 at night. She gave me the address and all the details about the kids I'd be watching. 2 boys, one 7 years old and the other 9. I thought it was going to be easy money. From my perspective, kids that age are easy to entertain, and not being babies wouldn't need constant attention. After talking to the lady, I told my friend about the job, and she got jealous over how much I was going to be paid. She had been doing nanny jobs through Craigslist for months and had never been offered a rate like the one I was about to receive, or at least that's what I had been told. That Saturday afternoon, I headed to the address Chloe had given me, and from the moment I arrived, I started to regret it. The house was located in a pretty rundown area. I wouldn't say it was dangerous, but definitely a poor and slightly deteriorated neighborhood. I knocked on the door and no one answered. I waited a few minutes and knocked several more times until finally, a strange-looking man opened the door. He was tall, thin, and had a huge gray beard. I guessed he was at least 50 years old, although he could have been younger and just looked very worn down by life. With a deep and raspy voice, he said, "Come on in, honey. Sorry I didn't hear the knocks. My ears aren't what they used to be." I walked into the house, and the first thing I noticed was how unfit the place was for children. There was trash everywhere and a general mess all around the entrance. While I was still standing near the door, the man said, "My wife should be arriving soon with the kids. Go ahead, take a seat and make yourself comfortable. Sorry about the mess. I know the house isn't very clean." I tried not to judge too quickly. I know it sounds like I should have run out of there, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions without knowing the real situation. The man pointed to a hallway and told me the living room was at the back of the house. I went back there and sat on a blue couch. At that moment, anxiety completely took over me. There were no pictures of kids, no toys, no signs that children lived there. While I waited on the couch, I could hear him walking back and forth in another room, muttering to himself. Every now and then he would shout, "Sorry, miss. My wife sometimes forgets the time. I promise she should be here any minute now." A few minutes later, he came into the living room, scratching his head with a big smile on his face. He said, "You know what? I'm an idiot. I bet my wife came in with the kids through the basement door. She's probably waiting for you down there. Nobody uses the main entrance like you did. The basement is right there. Why don't you go down and look for them? I'll catch up in a minute." He stood there like some kind of scarecrow, pointing at a door on the other side of the living room. I didn't know what to do, but I nodded and told him I'd go check. To be honest, by that point I had had enough. He smiled with a disturbing expression and said, "Perfect, honey. I'll see you down there in just a second." Then he walked back toward the front of the house. I opened the basement door out of curiosity, but I immediately realized no one was down there. The lights were off and the smell coming from that place was just revolting. There was no way I was going to go down. As I looked into the darkness of the basement, I could hear him still moving around the house. Without thinking twice, I ran toward the door I had come in through. When I reached it, I discovered it was locked. Quickly, I unlocked it, dashed toward my car, and just as I was opening the door to the vehicle, I heard him yelling from inside the house. I didn't stop to look. I started the car as he came running out, waving his arms. But luckily, I was already speeding down the street by the time he reached the front of the house. For a moment, I wondered if I should call the police, because technically nothing had happened to me and maybe I was overreacting. But after talking to my friend, she convinced me that I should report it, just in case. I made the call, and the person who answered assured me they would take care of it. For me, that was the end of it. Maybe the wife and kids were real. Maybe it was just a poor family that I judged unfairly. Maybe they really did use the basement entrance instead of the main one. But honestly, I'd rather be seen as a paranoid overthinker than risk becoming the victim of something far worse. The sense of alarm I felt made me run. And I still believe that gut feeling may have been the best decision of my entire life. Story 3. Last year I was trying to sell my 2007 Mercury Mariner. Even though it had quite a few miles and was an older model, the car was in overall good condition, ran very well, and was still a reliable vehicle. I decided to list it on Craigslist since I had bought other cars there in the past and had pretty good experiences. I took several pictures of the car and put it up for sale. The first day I didn't get any interest, but on the second day, a man messaged me introducing himself as Al, saying he wanted to buy the vehicle. From the very first message, he came across as pretty confident and seemed eager to close the deal. I had listed it at a fair price, so I didn't see a problem with giving him my address so he could come check out the car. I lived in an apartment complex and figured there wasn't much risk in sharing the location, since there were several buildings in the area. Plus, my car was already parked in the shared parking lot, and Al wouldn't have any way of knowing which apartment was mine. I asked him when he'd be available, and he said he could stop by after work, around 9 p.m. I told him that was fine, so that day I spent some time cleaning the car and getting it ready for the sale. When the next evening arrived, I left my building and walked over to the parking lot where I had the Mariner. Al arrived shortly after and parked nearby. He got out of his car and we met next to the vehicle. He was a burly guy with lots of tattoos, easily over 6 feet tall and weighing around 250 pounds. After we greeted each other, I showed him the car and he inspected it inside and out for several minutes. Then he asked to take it for a test drive, which I agreed to. We got in the car, and he drove it through some nearby streets as we looped around the area. During the drive, he told me he liked the car and that it seemed to be in good shape. At that moment, I really thought I was going to finalize the sale that very night. We returned to the apartment complex and he parked the car in the same spot it had been. But just as we got out of the vehicle, Al told me he was going to think about it. I was a little disappointed because he seemed very interested, but I just said okay and said goodbye. That's when he made a request that struck me as very strange. He asked if he could use my bathroom. I felt extremely uncomfortable. Why would he think that was okay to ask? I told him no, thank you, and started walking away. Something inside me told me this could be part of a setup, and I didn't want that man anywhere near my apartment. He stayed close to my car, not moving much. My building had a main entrance and a side entrance, and since the side door was closer, I decided to walk to the main entrance to avoid letting him know exactly where I was headed. When I got to the main doors, I looked back and didn't see him anywhere, which gave me some relief. I entered the building, turned right, and took the elevator to the 3rd floor where I lived. When I stepped out of the elevator, I started walking to the left, but at that moment I saw the door at the end of the hallway, the one that led to the stairs, open. It was Al coming into the hallway. What was he doing there? I froze for a moment and then, instead of going to my apartment, I turned around and began walking the other way. Then I heard Al start running behind me. I ran as fast as I could to the end of the hallway, entered the stairwell at the opposite end of the building, and bolted down the stairs. I could hear his footsteps chasing me. I reached the underground parking garage of the building, sprinted across to the other side, and luckily managed to gain a bit of distance. Still, I could hear him behind me, not slowing down. I ran up the stairs that led to the side exit, got out to street level, and ran straight to my car. I got in quickly, started the engine, and drove off as fast as I could. While driving, I called the police and told them everything that had happened. I drove around a few nearby streets and then returned to the complex. Al's car was still parked there, but he was no longer inside. A few minutes later, the patrol car arrived. I didn't want to go back into the building until they were there. When they went inside, they found Al trying to force his way into another apartment. So in the end, it turned out he was never really interested in buying my car. The whole thing had just been an excuse. He was probably planning to rob me, or who knows what else. Story 4. A few years ago, I decided to buy a television through Craigslist. Back then, I used to browse Craigslist constantly during work. I had gotten some really good deals in the past, sometimes even free stuff. You never really knew what you might find there, but you also knew you had to be careful. One day I came across a really good deal for a quality TV. I happened to be looking for one, and the ad looked pretty legit. The price was low, but not so cheap that it seemed like a scam. The photos of the TV looked like they were taken inside a home, which gave me some confidence. I replied to the ad saying I was interested in the TV, as long as it was still available. Within less than an hour, I received a text message from the seller. It was a woman who said her name was Joy. She gave me an address and asked me to come by the next night to pick up the TV. I looked up the address online, and it appeared to be a house in a neighborhood about 10 minutes away. The next day, I gathered the cash and drove to the place. I parked in front of the house on what seemed like a quiet street in an average neighborhood. I think it was around 7 p.m. when I knocked on the door. Joy opened quickly. She was a medium-height woman in her 30s with dark hair. She greeted me kindly and invited me inside. I stepped into what looked like the living room. There were boxes everywhere, and it seemed like they were either packing or had just moved in. There was hardly any furniture. Joy apologized for the mess, and I told her it was no problem. Then she said the television was in her bedroom. She led me down a hallway and stopped in front of a door that she opened. She pointed inside and said the TV was there. I walked into the room, and the first thing I noticed was that it was completely empty. Right then, the door slammed shut behind me. Everything happened so fast. I looked around. There was no TV, no furniture, nothing. I turned and saw that Joy had closed the door without entering the room. I went over to try to open it, but it was locked from the other side. I knocked and asked what was going on, but she didn't answer. I kept trying to open the door for another minute or two, but it wouldn't budge. I started yelling, asking for someone to open up, but there was no response. I realized there was no point in continuing, so I examined the room. It was a small, completely empty bedroom with not a single piece of furniture. I took out my phone to call a friend, but I didn't have a signal in that place, which I found really strange. I tried opening the door again and continued shouting for help, but it was clear no one was going to respond. As I wondered what the hell was going on, I started to hear noises outside the room, coming from what sounded like the living room. I recognized Joy's voice and also a man's voice. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was clear they were talking to each other. I yelled again, but once more they didn't respond. I then went to the window in the room and tried to open it, but it wouldn't move. It felt like it was jammed or sealed shut. That made me even more furious, and I went back to the door, determined to break it down. I started pounding on it with all my strength. That's when I heard a male voice yelling at me from the hallway to stop making noise. I had no idea what these people were capable of. I paused for a moment, then had an idea. I pulled out my phone and searched for the loudest alarm sounds I had. I turned the volume all the way up, picked the most unbearable one, and left it blaring on the other side of the room. Then I hid right next to the door, pressed against the wall. About 30 seconds later, I heard footsteps approaching. The man arrived at the door and opened it. As he stepped in, he headed straight toward the phone that was making all the noise. That's when I jumped out from my hiding spot, sprinted out of the room, and barely dodged him. I ran down the hallway, and when I reached the living room, I saw Joy standing there. She tried to stop me, but I managed to dodge her too. The man was already running after me. I opened the front door, and as I did, Joy grabbed my arm. I yanked myself free, bolted out of the house, and they both ran after me. Thankfully, I had my keys with me. I ran to my car, unlocked it, jumped in, and drove off at full speed. Unfortunately, I had left my phone inside the house, so I couldn't call the police right away. I drove to the first gas station I could find, went inside, and asked the clerk to call the police for me. The officers arrived at the station. I told them everything that happened, and we went back to the house together. They found my phone lying on the sidewalk a block away. When we got to the house, no one was there anymore. Later, I learned that those people didn't live in that house. The place had been rented by someone else. I don't know if they were ever caught. I checked Craigslist and the ad had already disappeared. The only thing I know is that after that experience, I'll never use Craigslist again.